Hi, I'm Seth with Wired Customs, and today I want to talk about storage options for your PC. Alright, so today we're going to talk about different storage options that you have for storing files and data on your PC. There are four main ones that I want to talk about. Of course, there are several more, but these are the most, I guess, commonly seen out in the PC world and probably the most applicable to you. So first off, we have the HDD, which stands for hard drive disk. Essentially, inside of the casing, there's a disk that spins and it has information imprinted on this disc, and like a record player, there's a needle that follows the tracks on the disc that reads the information. These are typically 5400 or 7200 RPM. They did make some gaming ones, that are 10,000 RPM, but those are pretty rare. The most commonly seen ones are 7200 RPM. Now these are the slowest drives to boot from anyways, and I guess accessing information, because you have to wait for that disk to spin and that needle to read it. You can't just go straight to the information. You're limited to that spinning disk speed for read and write. Most HDDs are roughly about 100 megabytes per second sequential read and write, which isn't great, but it's definitely still relevant. The best part about HDDs is they are great for mass storage, because they're so inexpensive. Getting like 4 terabyte or 8 terabyte ones for movies, music, whatever you might need it for is nice to have because it's fairly inexpensive. Whereas if you were to get a 2 or 4 terabyte SSD, that would cost a lot of money. Now moving on, we have the SSHD, which is kind of a hybrid mix between an SSD and an HDD. SSHD stands for solid state hybrid drive. This has a controller on it with a solid state portion. That solid state portion is usually pretty small. It acts as like a map to help the HDD access information faster, kind of like the NAND flash on an SSD. I was getting about 200 megabytes per second read or write. To me, these are kind of unreliable. I've had 2 of them fail on me. Maybe it's just me, maybe I just have bad luck, but it seems to me like these are probably the most unreliable forms of storage. And honestly, the performance isn't good enough to justify the risk. As far as storage goes, I don't think anything should justify a risk of failing it. Reliability should come first no matter what. I don't recommend getting an SSHD. I know Seagate Firecudas are really inexpensive and boast really good numbers, but they're inexpensive for a reason. These drives just, to me, are not a good option. So moving on, we have the SSD, which stands for solid state drive. Essentially, they have little sectors of this drive that store information. They're like little cubes, I guess, to break it down in layman's terms. And there's a part of the SSD that has a map that knows where all your files are stored. So whenever your computer goes to access that file, it knows exactly where it's at. You can go straight to it and access that, as opposed to waiting for that spinning disk to read the information. So SSDs are a lot faster, and they do come in a few different varieties. I'm going to start explaining the 2.5 inch SSD first off. So the 2.5 inch is pretty much the same thing as like a 3.5 inch hard drive, except it's scaled down. Most of them fit in 3.5 inch sleds. You just have to screw them in a little bit differently. Sometimes they'll have adapters, but it's just a smaller kind of rectangle, just like a normal hard drive would be. And they are SATA 3 compatible. So you just plug the SATA cable in your motherboard and then use the SATA power cable from your power supply, and you're good to go. It's really that simple. Most SSDs will saturate SATA 3 speeds, which means you're getting sequential 500 megabytes per second read and write. Some of them you'll get lucky and you can get even above 500 somehow, like 550, but that's what most SSDs operate at. They're a really good value. This day and age, with what SSDs cost, you don't really have an excuse to not have an SSD as a boot drive. Even if it is just a 2.5-inch SSD, they're exponentially better than a regular hard drive. In my opinion, you should only be using regular hard drives for mass storage, unless you're doing like the most basic of budget builds. But even then, it's hard not to justify a small size cheap SSD, because even they're pretty affordable. So we're going to talk about M.2. M.2 is not a drive type, it's a form factor. I'm tired of people hearing, oh, you know, I have an M.2 drive, blah blah blah. No, M.2 is a size just like 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch. So the SATA SSDs that are M.2 form factor use chipset lanes on your motherboard. And this is nice because you can just plug it in, bolt it down, and there's no cables or anything else to worry about. You don't have to run SATA power from your power supply. You don't have to run SATA 3 cables from your motherboard. It just slides in there and that's it. There's nothing more to it. And you're still getting the same SATA speeds, which is nice. So that brings us to our last drive, which is NVMe. NVMe stands for non-volatile memory, and this is the fastest available storage we have to date. They come in X2 or X4, which is the number of PCI lanes they use. They don't use chipset lanes, they use PCI lanes, which makes them a lot faster. Now granted, if you have too many of these on your motherboard, if they support a certain amount, and you have multiple graphics cards, you will be sharing PCI lanes with your NVMe drives. So be mindful of that. If you're running an SLI setup, I don't recommend more than 1 or 2. Check your motherboard and make sure you have enough PCI lanes for every PCI device that you're using, and that may be network cards, NVMe drives, graphics cards, sound cards. It could be a number of things that use your PCI lanes, so be mindful of that. NVMe drives, I have seen up to 2 gigabytes a second read or write, and that is insanely fast, especially if you have it set up for your operating system. So if that's the drive you're booting into, I mean, all of your programs, everything will load faster than you can take your finger off the power button. I mean, it's insane. It's so nice to have. Now granted, given that these are very expensive, so I really can only recommend them for operating system drives if it's your boot drive. But I mean, if you have the money to use that for mass storage, for games or whatever, more power to you, because I will tell you, they are very, very nice to have. I just recently upgraded to one in my build, and I could tell immediately switching from a regular 2.5-inch SSD boot drive into an X4 NVMe, specifically the 970 EVO. Holy crap, it's so much faster. It's amazing. So that's kind of the background on the 4 different drives. Just a quick overview. HDD, really slow, spinning disk, cheap, great for mass storage. SSHD, some weird hard drive SSD bastard that doesn't work well and fails often. Yeah. SSD, which is awesome boot drive for budget systems and just great overall storage. And NVMe, blazing fast, super expensive, amazing to have for an operating system. Even more amazing if that's the only drive that you have on your computer. No cables or anything like that, but also shares PCIe lanes, so if you're SLIing stuff, be mindful. Okay, so I actually have 3 of those drives with me. All 3 of them I have Windows installed on. So I'm going to benchmark them with Crystal Disk Mark, and I'm also going to record the time it takes to boot into the operating system from the time I hit the power button to the time my desktop background loads. So we can kind of compare and see the differences of like how much difference does it make for boot times and loading into your operating system, so you can justify which one works for you. If you're happy with the HDD speed, which is probably, I'm guessing, like a 1.5 minute load time, that's fine because they're super cheap. So if you can deal with that, that's great because you're saving a ton of money. But people like me that have stuff to do, don't have time to waste, there might be a huge difference there, and you might be able to justify spending the extra money getting that faster storage to load into your operating system, have more responsive load times from games, programs, etc. So without me babbling on anymore, I'm going to run benchmarks on Crystal DiskMark, and we can see exactly what read and write speeds we're getting on each of these drives. Alright, so here I have Crystal DiskMark pulled up. Super simple program. We're going to be looking at the top two numbers, read and write, that sequential number. To me, that's the most important. The other three are just how it interprets small chunks of data. But the sequential read and write speed are really what's most important. And so with this, you can choose how many passes you want. So I did 2 with a 500 megabit file. And so we can choose all of the drives that we have. My C drive is the 970 EVO. F is my removable thumb drive, my Windows install. K is my HDD, and M is my SSD. So we're going to start off with the slowest, and we are going to bench these top two numbers. This doesn't take very long typically, so I'm having it do 2 passes for consistency to kind of get an average. And again, this is on the 7200 RPM HDD. So like I said, we're getting about 152 on the read, or I guess closer to 153 really, and the write should be somewhere in the neighborhood of that as well, I think. I'm gonna guess about 160 maybe. It's completed 1 pass, yeah, 152. So that is an extremely typical 3.5 inch HDD speed. We are going to move on, and I'm going to keep the settings the same, so we're still doing 2 500 megabit passes. We're going to move on to the 2.5 inch SSD. This is the physical drive, it's not M.2, so this is connected with a SATA cable and has SATA power going to it. So let's see what this gets. This should take even less time, and it should be about 500 megabytes per second, or megabits, however it reads it. And this is actually, oh wow, this is the Crucial MX500 specifically that we're testing right now on this one. It's a really good drive, it's really affordable, has not done me wrong. I've purchased several of them because their price just can't be beat. Crucial really did a good job with this SSD. So here we can see it got 563 for read and 514 for write. So those are amazing scores. I mean, to me that's really all you need, but we're going to check out the Samsung 970 EVO here, which is X4 NVMe. So let's see how fast this one goes. And this is my boot drive. It's only 250 gigabyte, but I mean it's a boot drive, so that's all I need. So that's 3.5 gigabytes per second. That is 7 times faster than my SSD. That is an absolutely outrageous speed, and I'm guessing write is going to be pretty close to that. Oh, no? Okay. Writing 1.5 gigs a second is still absolutely insane. So you can see here the kind of scores to expect with these drives. So as you saw, huge difference between the 3 drives, and the prices are pretty different too. So it's really just what you can justify. Now for the most practical application, boot times. We're gonna see how long it takes Windows to load, because those are just numbers, right? Like, what do those numbers actually mean to you? So just for a quick and easy demonstration, we're gonna see how long it takes to boot into Windows. So I have on all 3 of those drives a Windows operating system installed, so we can see exactly how long it takes. So I'm gonna fire that up right now. We're gonna go slowest first, then we're gonna do the SSD and then the NVMe. So Alright, so just to let you guys know, so the RAM doesn't have anything preloaded in it. I have fastboot turned off, just in case anybody was curious and wanted to try and say, oh, you had fastboot on. Nope, right here in the BIOS, I don't know if you can see it, but I have it disabled right now. So fastboot is off. This is going to be fair across the board. Alright, so here we go. First one is the HDD. Gonna be booting into Windows. Here I have my clock. See that right about there. So 3, 2, 1. Oh man, listen to that thing spin up. Oh, it's such a crazy sound. That glare is really bad. Alright, so we're going on about 20 seconds. Just now getting into the BIOS. Oh, that glare is so bad. 30 seconds. Still in the BIOS. Coming up on 40. Almost there, 50 seconds. Oh my God. Oh no, come on. Boot, I know you can do it. Oh, there we go. A minute 14 to boot into Windows from an HDD. That's not super terrible, I guess, comparatively speaking, from how bad things used to be in the past, but you can definitely do a lot better. So let's boot with the SSD and see how big of a change that is. Time to beat is 1:14. Okay, now we are going to be booting from the SSD. So 3, 2, 1. Let's see how long it takes to get into Windows. And of course BIOS pops up on the other screen. Come on. Still showing that BIOS screen. Takes a little bit. It's loading and oh no. Oh, okay. I did just a little bit prematurely, so we'll say 41, 42 seconds. I accidentally stopped it a little early, but it was for like half a second. So we'll just round it up to 42 seconds for the SSD, which is roughly 30 seconds faster than the HDD. Now let's see what happens when we boot into Windows using NVMe. Okay, I have it set up to boot from the 970 Evo. So, without further ado, 3, 2, 1. And hopefully this time I won't hit the stop button early. Let me keep my finger there just in case. And watch the screen. We're on BIOS right now. And a good portion of this time. Oh, here we go. Alright, 40 seconds again. This is mostly due to the fact that I don't have fastboot enabled. I think that helps a lot. And the fact that I have the BIOS delay, I do have the BIOS screen set to stall for like 5 to 10 seconds, I think it is, somewhere in there. So that way I have a chance to enter setup. Alright, well, all 3 of my camera batteries are dead, unfortunately, due to negligence on my end. So we were going to shoot this from the desktop. Thank God I have the means to do so. Otherwise this video would be very much delayed. So we covered the different kinds of drives, how they work. We benchmarked them and we saw the speeds, what they're capable of. So now for the most applicable part to you and also me, price to performance. What are you paying for these different kinds of drives? So let's take a look and compare some drives. I'm going to do what I feel like are the 2 most popular and successful models of each style of drive. And we're going to do that in a 500 gigabyte storage capacity and a 1 terabyte storage capacity for each of them. So it's going to be 4 comparisons for 4 different drive types to try and give you the most full, big, all-encompassing picture of drive costs and what to expect and what prices you can get them for. So you have kind of an idea if you can, justify going with NVMe if it's a few dollars more, or if the price gap is actually huge and you're like, no, I don't want that, that's too much. Yeah, I'm going to be using Amazon to check all these prices because Amazon is great. Not only do they have free 2-day shipping with Prime, but I feel like in most cases they have the lowest prices and more often than not include free shipping. So tons of people use Amazon. It's incredibly relevant. So let's go shop on Amazon for some drives and see how much they cost. Okay, so starting with the HDDs, we have our first one, which is the WD Black, my personal favorite for HDD storage. This is the 500 gigabyte model and 7200 RPM, pretty standard. You can get this bad boy for $66 shipped. That is a really good price for 500 gigabytes, super cheap. And again, this is definitely a very reliable hard drive, really good model. I would have absolutely no issues putting this in any build. So let's see how much its competitor costs at the same size. So here we have another HDD. I'm not a huge fan of Seagate, but they seem to be a really popular company. Definitely a very big name in the storage industry. You can get this drive for $23 for 500 gigabytes. That's an incredible value. I mean, $500 or 500 gigabytes for an HDD. Are you really going to be using that? No, probably not. That's usually for mass storage, which is 1, 2, 4, 8, 12 terabytes. But just to compare prices, just for the sake of that, just to show you how affordable these are, 500 gigabytes for 23 bucks. So let's go back and look at the WD Black again. And this time we're going to look at the 1 terabyte models. So here we are back at the WD Black. This one is 1 terabyte and only a few more dollars than its 500 gigabyte twin. I believe it's like a $10 price difference for double the size. So again, amazing value. It's really hard to beat these prices. For mass storage, 73 bucks for a really solid HDD that is going to last you for years and years. Awesome dollar value. Now again, 1 minute and 14 seconds to boot into Windows, so wouldn't recommend using this for a boot drive, but for mass storage, it's awesome. Okay, so here's the 1 terabyte version of the Seagate Barracuda. This is only 45 bucks. It is so incredibly cheap. I think the cache sizes might be different on the WD Black and the Barracuda. I didn't check that. That might be another thing that kind of sets them apart. The dollar value for what you're getting. HDDs are awesome. I'm pretty sure I've beat this horse to death. Let's move on to some SSDs. Okay, so here we have one of my all-time favorite drives, the Crucial MX500, absolute beast. You saw it yourself, 560 gigabytes per second read, and about, I think it was like 550-ish or 500-ish, right? And you can see for the 500 gigabyte model, it's only $85, and then knock it down 44 cents when you apply the coupon. Amazing. So for just about 85 bucks, you can get 500 gigabytes of blazing fast SSD storage. Now we're gonna check out a little bit higher tier competitor and kind of compare prices with what that might cost. So here we have the latest gen of Samsung's 2.5-inch SSD, the 860 EVO, same size, 500 gigabytes as well, also a 2.5-inch form factor. It's within margin of error for price almost. I mean, it's what, $2 more? They perform almost identical, so again, you're getting a great dollar value. They're both about 85 bucks. I guess that's what you can expect to pay for a 500 gigabyte SSD. Now let's go to the 1 terabyte models and see how much those cost. So we're back with the MX500. Unfortunately, unlike with what we saw with the HDDs, how it was only like a couple dollars more for twice the storage amount, with these it's actually pretty much just twice the price for twice the storage. It seems like storage and cost are pretty parallel. Unfortunately, that really sucks because you're not really saving any money there, but it is what it is. 160 bucks for 1 terabyte of SSD. Still not terrible. I wonder if the 860 EVO is going to be any different, if they give you any kind of special discount with getting a higher storage size, if it'll be cheaper. So let's take a look. Nope, again, very consistent. Just a couple dollars more than the MX500. It's super consistent there. So we didn't catch a break. 163 for this one. That's what you can expect to pay for a 2.5-inch solid state drive. Now for the most expensive ones, let's see what NVMe costs. Okay, so here we are back with Western Digital and their NVMe drives, their X4. Now, just a quick side note about Western Digital, their 2nd gen NVMe Blacks, tons of problems, failed all the time, garbage. They had a blue PCB, which doesn't make WD Black blue PCB, I don't know. But the 3rd gen kicks ass. They have very, very low failure rate, they work wonderfully, awesome drive. And you can tell it's a 3rd gen because they actually went with a black PCB on this one. So that's that's a big identifying factor. So if you do look to get one of these, make sure you get the 3rd gen. They know they kind of messed up with the 2nd gen, so usually it'll be labeled pretty obviously. You can tell right here, Gen 3, not 2, it's 3. But right here for the 500 gigabyte model, we can see it's $138. That is roughly about what the 1 terabyte cost for the SSD. So NVMe is quite a bit more expensive. Now if we go to the name brand Samsung model, let's see what that costs. Boom, $147. So just about the same price. $147, $138, yeah. So $9 more, and that is the exact same drive that I benchmarked, that you saw for the C drive benchmark earlier in the video. This is the same exact one, except mine was the 250 gig. I don't have the 500, I just have the 250 for my boot drive. They're roughly about 140 to 150 for the 500 gig. Now for the 1 terabyte, again, almost linear for dollar per storage amount. We're up to $277, $278 for the 1 terabyte model. So that's almost $300 for 1 terabyte of storage, which is double what the 2.5-inch SSD costs. And over here, it's just about the same for the WD Black. It's $270 for the 1 terabyte model. Yeah, not cheap at all. At least in my opinion. Maybe you can justify it and afford it, but to me that is an ass load of money to spend for just 1 terabyte of storage. My personal rig has a little over 6 terabytes. It's 6 terabytes of storage and then the 250 gig for boot. So if I was to use 6 $300 drive, that's over $1,500 just for storage. Not to mention I wouldn't have nearly the amount of M.2 drives, or I guess I could get 2 terabyte drives, but I digress. So looking at the graph, you can kind of see what to expect to pay for each size and each form factor of storage. Prices are pretty consistent throughout brands, so that's not something to worry about, but definitely Google the brand that you're interested in buying to make sure that they don't have a high failure rate like the 2nd gen WD Black NVMEs did, just to make sure that, you know, there's not a ton of bad reviews on it. For the most part, they are extremely similar in development and design as well as cost. So it's not a super huge deal what brand you go with, as long as you research and make sure that high failure rates weren't reported. That's a big deal. So like I said, your best dollar value with HDDs is to go with mass storage. If you need lots of media stored, you could see, you know, 1 terabyte was like 60 bucks. So obviously it's incredibly cheap to store a large amount of information, but they are pretty slow to boot off of. A minute and 14. The SSD 500 gig was pretty cheap. I think that was right around 80, and then the 1 terabyte was double that, and then the same thing, NVMe was 150 for 500 gig, and then about 270 for a terabyte. So it's really just how much does speed matter to you? What's in your budget? Can you justify getting more expensive storage or not? And you can kind of go explore your options based on that. One very important thing that I forgot to mention, with NVMe, we noticed the same boot time roughly. It was within 2 seconds, almost margin of error, booting into Windows. I think that is pretty much limited to just how fast the motherboard can go through all of the processes, but I will tell you there is a huge difference when it comes to loading startup programs. The SSD is noticeably slower than the NVMe loading startup programs. It takes, man, I want to say like less than 5 seconds to load up all of my programs, and I have a ton of startup crap because I have programs for my peripherals, I have Aura Sync, I have Afterburner, I have all kinds of stuff that needs to run in the background for my computer to work the best it can. So an SSD will be noticeably slower. You're looking at like 20, maybe 30 seconds for all of the startup programs. I didn't want to compare those for the simple fact that everybody's startup programs are different, so there's really no constant there. There's too much of a variable, so I just thought it would be worth mentioning. You won't see a notice in boot times per se, but once you're into Windows, everything will load like instantly. The X4 NVMe to me is absolutely worth having a boot drive, and if you get a 126 or a 250, just a small size just to hold Windows and maybe a couple very important programs, that is a pretty good idea. You save a lot of money doing that. You don't have to spend, you know, the money for a 500 gigabyte NVMe drive. I've spent a ton of time droning on. If you liked the video, hit the thumbs up. If it sucked, give me a thumbs down. Be sure to subscribe because I'm going to keep hitting you with some knowledge. I'm going to keep making these videos, reviews, benchmarks, everything. So be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss anything. Thanks for stopping by and watching the video. I hope I can help you decide what drive you need to put in your computer. That being said, take care and we'll see you in the next one.